In today's story, I want you to listen to the whole thing, and I promise you there's a reason why. Because the twist in this story is so ludicrous that it might keep you up at night, because this thing that happens could theoretically happen to you. But before we begin, if true crime stories intrigues your interest, then I would highly suggest you hit the subscribe button, because that's all I do, and I upload once a week. And if you don't mind, please hit that notification bell so that YouTube will notify you every time I upload, so you can be the first ones to my videos. But with all that being said, let's begin. Skylar Anthonetta Neese was a girl who was born on February 10th, 1996. She would be born into a small town called Morgantown, which was located in West Virginia. And growing up, Skylar would be one of those loving girls that would just naturally attract friends. And for most of her school life, it was pretty easy to make friends and never to be lonely, as again her personality would just rub off of people. But in high school, specifically her sophomore year, Skylar would meet two girls named Sheila Eddy and Rachel Shorf, and right away from the moment they met each other, everything would click, and pretty quickly the three would spend a lot of time together, in school anyways. And as their friendship grew and grew, they would spend more time with each other, even outside of school. And for the rest of her sophomore year, Skylar's school life would be amazing, but also her home life would be just as amazing as well. Growing up, Skylar's parents would just spoil her all the time, especially her dad, which his name was David, and David would go out of his way just to make Skylar laugh. And one of the moments would be when David came back home. He would be immediately met with his daughter, Skylar, her young version, and she would grab his arm and tell him to sit down for a tea party. And so Dave would sit down and watch her as she's pouring some water into a plastic cup. And then when she was done, she would proceed to give it to Dave. And then Dave would take a sip and would tell Skylar that this was the best tea I've ever had, which every time Skylar heard this, she would blush. And then she would proceed to do a pat and a bear hug on him. But moving on to 2012, Skylar's just turned 16. And while she thought to herself, since I'm not really doing much out of school, I might as well go get a part-time job so I can earn some money. And so she would go to the local Wendy's restaurant and she would get a job there, and she would work there for a while. But moving on again to July 5th, and well, she was pretty new to the fast food workplace, and so when she got back home, she was pretty tired, especially with all the commotion that she had to go through with customers and her peers. And so when she walked into her parents' apartment, she was obviously greeted by her parents, but instead of sitting down on the kitchen table and eating food with her parents, she would tell her parents straight away that, I'm feeling a bit tired, I might just go to bed right away. And well, her parents didn't argue, they just told her, have a good night and we'll see you in the morning. And well, the three would say goodbye to each other and Skylar would head into her bedroom, closing the door behind her. The next morning, Dave and his wife Mary would wake up bright and early in the morning because they had work, and they would do the usual things like brush their teeth, put their clothes on, and after they would head into the kitchen where they would proceed to have breakfast. And as they were eating, they looked at each other and then looked at Skylar's room, and they both told themselves that Skylar should be awake right now, she has work. And as soon as Dave was about to get up and check on Skylar, Mary would stop Dave because she would remember that it's Skylar's day off today. And so both parents would sit back down and would continue their morning routine. And when the time came for Skylar's parents to go to work, they both went to Skylar's bedroom door and they were about to knock on it before they told themselves that she's probably tired and she probably deserves a lie in, so we'll just leave her be. And so they both left, and later on in the afternoon, Dave would finish work early and would come back home, and he would go to his room straight away and get changed. And as soon as he got changed, he left the room and noticed that Skylar's door was still closed. And then when he noticed that, he looked at his watch and saw that it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. She should be awake by now. And as he was thinking about this thought, he looked around the house and noticed that nothing had been moved, which kind of confirmed to Dave that Skylar was still asleep. So kind of upset, Dave would actually walk to Skylar's door and would knock on the door. And then once he knocked on the door, he would shout, hey, I'm home. And well, he would stand there and wait and would get no response. And so he would knock on the door again and would tell Skylar that, hey, you know, it's the afternoon right now, you should probably be up, and if you continue to sleep, you won't get enough sleep in the night. But again, he was met with silence. And so Dave would put his ear on the door to hear what Skylar was doing, because what she was doing right now was very unlike her. And as he was trying to listen, he noticed that there's no sound coming from Skylar's room. And so at this point, Dave had enough and he would just open the door. And as soon as the door slowly opened, he noticed that Skylar's not on her bed. So David would walk into the middle of the room and would just look around, trying to remember if Skylar had told him that she was going out this afternoon. But no matter how long he stood in the middle of the room trying to remember if Skylar told him anything, he would come to the conclusion that she didn't say anything to him, which of course again was very unlike her. Skylar would tell her parents everything. So a bit worried, David would just call Skylar, and just like the bedroom incident, he would get no response. Now Dave is trying at this point to not overreact to the situation, so he would call his wife Mary, and she would pick up straight away, and he would proceed to tell her that, have you seen Skylar, or do you know what Skylar's up to? And his wife, in a confused voice, would say, no I don't, I thought she would be in a bedroom. And Dave would speak back in a more concerned voice, saying she's not in her room. And Dave's wife was more of the rational thinker, and she would comfort him by saying she must be out with her friends and she'll probably be back soon. And Dave, after calming down, he would agree, and they would both hang up. But Dave really wanted to know where Skylar was, so he would call her close friend Sheila. And once she answered, David would get straight to the point and would ask that, just out of curiosity, do you know where Skylar is? And when he said that, Dave was fully expecting Sheila to go, yeah, she's with me or with someone else. But to his horror, Sheila would say, I haven't seen her, but I did talk to her last night. And so Dave would ask, what did he talk about? And she would reply back saying, oh, just nothing, just about class assignments and just other school stuff. And so David, a bit stunned, would tell Sheila that, oh, that's fine, if you see Skylar, tell her to let me know where she is. And then the two hung up. And once Dave hung up, he would just sit on Skylar's bed and would begin to look up into the sky. And now his feet was beginning to shake because this was unusual for Skylar. But he wouldn't sit long as he began to look around the room to see if he can kind of piece out where Skylar went, because again, how she left without telling her parents was still absurd to them. And so as Dave's looking around, he noticed that Skylar's closet was closed, which Dave would walk up to it, open up, and see in the middle of the closet a mesh net that shouldn't be on the closet, it should be mounted on the window, but it was in her closet. So Dave would pick it up and begin to inspect it and would ask himself, why the hell's this in here? And since this belonged to the window, Dave would instantly turn around and look at the window, and then he would begin to walk over to the window. And Skylar's window was one of them windows where you lift it up. And as David began to look closely at this window, he noticed that on the bottom of the window where you lift it up was a small crack. And the crack is small, but it was just enough where you can put your fingernail up and lift it up. And so out of curiosity, David would lift up the window and would poke his head out to see what was going on. And as he's looking around outside, trying to figure out why a mesh net would be just taken off like this, he would decide to look straight down, and well, he would notice several feet down, there was a bench on the ground, and it had been clearly moved there recently. And now David began to think that, did my daughter sneak out of the house? Because in Dave's mind, that would never cross his mind. But after what he's seen about the net and the bench, he has to take this into consideration. And after a while, he would tell himself that all of this adds up for her to sneak out. And then he starts to think that if Skylar did sneak out, why would she not put everything back in when she snuck back in? Because closing the window and putting the screen mesh over it isn't really hard at all. It'll take you about a couple of seconds to do. Or even in the morning, why would Skylar not just move the bench out the way so it wouldn't draw any suspicion? And that's when it clicked. David knew that Skylar did sneak out, but the problem was she hadn't returned yet. Now David went from a big concern to really concerned, but he stopped himself because he thought he might just be jumping to conclusions, and maybe this is just a whole coincidence that just happened to be. And before he went any further, he decided to call Mary and to explain everything to her, because again, she was a more rational thinker. So he would call Mary again, she would answer, and he would explain everything, and Mary would just tell him that just give her a couple of hours to return, and once she does, we will make sure that she tells us everything. And so they waited a couple of hours, and 4 p.m. would come rolling by, and around 4:30 was when Dave's phone would begin to ring. And Dave's phone was screen first down, so he couldn't see who was calling him. And as soon as he flipped over the phone, he saw that it was Sheila's work, the Wendy's restaurant. So Dave would just take a deep breath in and would answer the phone. And right away, Dave was greeted by Sheila's manager, who would call in and ask, hey there, where's Sheila? Because she was meant to be in work today, but she didn't show up, which is highly unusual for Sheila. And also, if she was going to be off, she didn't even call us in to let us know that she was going to be off. Now the alarm bells are starting to ring for both parents, and now Dave's went from concern to just extreme panic mode because something must have happened. And whatever this something is, it's very bad. So Dave would apologize to the manager and would say also that we haven't seen Sheila at all. And as soon as he hung up with the restaurant, he would call the police. And a couple of seconds later, operator would answer the phone. And without wasting a second, Dave would get straight into it and would just tell them that my 16-year-old daughter has been missing. And so the operator would ask back, where did she go? And then he would go on to say that she snuck out last night, but she hasn't returned yet. And she had missed work, which is something that she never does. So the operator would ask Dave, has she ever done this before? And Dave would quickly answer, no she hasn't. And so the police would be sent out and Dave and the operator would hang up on the phone. And at this point Mary had returned home and the two began to frantically think about what they should do. And so Mary would tell Dave maybe we should join the police and search for Skylar, but Dave would reply back maybe we should just stay in the house and wait for her just in case she showed up. So both parents are talking to each other, figuring out what they should do. And as they were having this conversation with each other, all of a sudden Mary's phone would begin to ring and it was Sheila. And so Mary would quickly answer, hoping for some good news. But instead of good news that Mary was hoping for, Sheila would just ask Mary, hey, sorry to bother you, but has Skylar came home yet? So almost in a disappointed tone, Mary would reply back, no she hasn't. And in fact we've just called the police to help search for her because all of this doesn't make sense and we think we need the police to help us. And as soon as Sheila hears this, she takes a deep breath and takes a gulp and calmly says, Mary, I need to tell you something, and it's about last night. And then Sheila would go on to say that last night where Skylar told her parents that she was going to bed early, she would actually just go to bed early so she can get ready to sneak out. And Sheila, Skylar and Rachel, so the three best friends, would drive around town smoking marijuana. But it doesn't end there though, even though both of Skylar's parents are shocked because they would never imagine their girl would do such a thing. The big secret was when they decided to go out, they would make sure to park a couple of blocks away so they wouldn't grab any attention. And so when Skylar leaves her room through the window, she would hop down the bench where she placed that in the morning and would walk a couple of blocks away from her house where she would meet her two friends. And once they were done with their nightly activities, she would be dropped off again a couple of blocks away and she would just walk back home from there. And Sheila would go on to continue to say that Sheila would leave her house just like she always did and would walk a couple of blocks to the car, and once she finally met up with her two friends, they would drive off, and once they were done having fun, they would drop Skylar off at the exact same location. But this time, instead of waiting for her to walk off, they would just drive off instantly, and so they don't know if she came home safe or not. And now Mary and Dave are horrified that their precious daughter could have been kidnapped, because where she gets dropped off is pretty dark, and again it's the middle of the night, so you don't know what happens. And also again, not to mention, she's probably under the influence of marijuana, so all this just doesn't add up to anything good. So Mary would thank Sheila for the honesty and would hang up, and she would tell the police straight away what she's been told. Then Mary and Dave would head out to go meet with Sheila and her mother, and they would begin to search around the surrounding apartments in hopes that Sheila might have just been trapped somewhere, because they thought that she might have been in the surrounding area and she might have been trapped or hurt. But looking around and knocking on many doors, they would come to the conclusion that she's not here. So the group's morale is down and they just feel completely useless, because even though the police are doing their part on hunting Skylar down, the group wanted to make sure that they're doing something. But when the group sat down on a patch of grass, Mary had one of those eureka moments. She remembered outside of her apartment was security cameras that had probably picked up Skylar walking to wherever she was going or walking back home. And so the four of them would sprint back to the apartment where they would track down the security manager, and they would explain to the manager that this is what happened and we think Skylar's been abducted and we believe that your security cameras have picked up Skylar. And without any hesitation, the manager would bring up the footage from last night, and while the footage itself made no sense at all, they would see that Sheila had dropped off Skylar just around the corner, but out of view from the camera around about 12:30. But half an hour later you can see another car pulling up right in front of the apartment this time, and then you can see Skylar running towards this car and getting into this car, where the car would just proceed to drive off. So this doesn't really solve the case of where she went, but now they know how she disappeared. But also they need to know who was driving this car and also what kind of car was she in. But at least it gives Skylar's parents a bit of relief, because at least they know that Skylar had got into this car in her own accord, so at least it's not a kidnapping. So the next couple of days the police would do their best to analyze the footage of what car Skylar got into, but since the footage was so grainy, it was very difficult for them to make out anything. And of course on top of that, it would be non-stop of Dave and Mary calling to get any updates on it. And eventually the police would just have enough and would tell the parents that we understand your concern, but we are sure that Skylar is just going to turn up anytime now. And that's because even though you don't want to believe it, your daughter's a teenager, and what teenagers do all the time is run away, even if it's for a couple of days, and they would just return back and everything would be normal again. But again, we still don't know whose car she's got in or what kind of car it is. But when she comes back, I'm sure when she feels comfortable enough, she's going to open up and tell you guys what happened and why she did it. So the parents, in a defeated state would agree and would just go back home and would let a couple of days go by, but still no sign of Skylar. And they would wait again, and soon a couple of weeks would turn into a couple of months and still no sign of Skylar. But in this time, the police would gather up as many searches as they can, and they would begin to search the local town. And they would put up many leaflets around the town in hopes of someone looking at one of these leaflets and recognizing Skylar, but again, nothing would be found. And again, Skylar's parents would be devastated, because for their daughter to run away and not come back or even stay in touch was truly heartbreaking. And now 6 months would go by and December time's rolling on, and once again no sign of Skylar, and no one's even heard about her or even had any idea where she went. So people knew that this case was going cold. But things would change on December 12th. On this night, Rachel would begin to have a massive breakdown, and it was so bad that she would begin to scream around the house, punching her own family members, and it got to the point where her own mother called the police on her. And this is how the call went.
I have an issue with a 16-year-old daughter of mine. I can't control her anymore. She's screaming. She's running through the neighborhood. Give me the phone. No, this is over. This is over. Hurry up. Oh, God. She just gave me a block. Oh, God. Hurry up, please.
Once the police finally showed up, they would take Rachel to a psychiatrical hospital, and she would stay there for a couple of days until she was released. And as soon as she was released, she would head straight to the police station and would tell the person at the front desk, I need to tell you something. I need to get this off my chest. I just can't handle it anymore. And the front desk lady would be like, what's this about? And then Rachel, with her eyes widen, would tell her, it's about Skylar. It's a secret about her that I've just been hiding and I can't keep it. So the lady, a bit taken aback, would say, okay, we'll take you to an interview room. And as soon as she told her, an officer would walk by and would volunteer to interrogate her. So they would both sit down, and the officer would be like, what do you want to tell me? And now what I'm about to tell you is from this interview that she had. It starts back on the 5th of July 2012. Skylar had came back home from a shift at Wendy's, and as you know, she would head home and get straight into her house, where she would proceed to tell her parents that she's too tired and she wants to go to bed straight away. And so when Skylar would get into her room, she would lie on her bed and would begin to scroll on her phone until she got messages, and those messages were from Rachel and Sheila, and they would be about if she wanted to sneak out that night. And at first Skylar didn't want to go, because during school time the three actually had got into a fight, because the problem was Sheila and Rachel were getting really close and they were just pushing away Skylar from the group. And Skylar could see this, and to give you an example, Sheila and Rachel would be matching outfits and wouldn't tell Skylar about it, and so when school time came they would be matching and Skylar would be the odd one out. And again, Skylar could see that she was being pushed away, and so in a protest against this action, she would decline the offer to go out. And at first the two would be surprised on why Skylar would deny this offer, because she had never done it before. But a couple of hours later of convincing Skylar, she would finally agree. So just before 12:30 on July 6th, Skylar would head towards a window, take off the net meshing, put that in the closet, and then she would open the window, and then she would lower herself down from the window. But before she jumped off, she would make sure to close the window, but just enough so she can come back in again. And then she would wait at the side of her apartment until a couple of minutes later an unknown car came, which was the same car that the surveillance camera picked up. And well, that unknown car belongs to Sheila, and at the front was Rachel with her. And this is where the police found out that Sheila had lied about everything that night, from the time where Skylar got picked up to where they dropped her off. Anyways, the three girls would drive off from Skylar's apartment. The three girls would hop onto a highway where they would drive northwest, and the girls wouldn't start smoking straight away. They would wait until they got to the spot, and this spot was known for many teenagers to go to where they would smoke. And it was about a 45-minute drive, just barely across the borders into Pennsylvania, and it was kind of this old country road that nobody drove on. So about after 45 minutes of driving, the three girls would come onto this road and then eventually onto the grass, where the car would be parked and the three girls would head out and would walk a little ways down this path until eventually the three girls would arrive at this clearing. And on the right of this clearing was a bit of a mini hill where the three girls would go up and they would sit down, and they would sit in a line where everyone's facing down the hill, and where Sheila would be on the right and Skylar would be in the middle, and then Rachel would be on the left. So Sheila would pull out her joint and she would begin to check her pockets for a lighter, and she would notice that she hadn't bring a lighter with her. So Rachel and Skylar would pat themselves down to see if they had a light on them, but none of them did. So Rachel and Sheila would both stare at Skylar and would ask her, hey, can you quickly run to the car and get the lighter from there? And again, of course, Skylar was a nice girl, so she didn't even hesitate and would say, okay, I will. And so she would get up and she would begin to walk to the car. And as soon as she got up and started walking, she would hear her two friends begin to get up and start walking spoken as well, and all she would have heard was 1, 2, and 3. And when 3 was shouted, all Skylar would have felt was 2 knives stabbed into her back by none other than Rachel and Sheila. And Skylar wouldn't turn around to see what was going on. She would begin to just run, and she would just sprint towards the car and eventually get away from her attackers. But due to the injuries that she sustained, she would slow down heavily, which then the 2 friends would catch up, and that's when Skylar would be tackled to the floor by Sheila, and then she would be pinned to the floor, and Sheila would try to stab her again and again, but Skylar was doing the best to defend herself and just keeping the knife off her. But at some point of the scuffle, Rachel would come behind Sheila, and both girls would pin Skylar's arm to the floor, and well, at this point both girls would take turns stabbing Skylar on her chest, on her neck, everywhere. And all this time Skylar would just try to do her best to defend herself, but eventually she would give up and just shout, "Why are you doing this to me?" But the 2 girls would ignore her and just continue to keep going, and Rachel would stop eventually, but Sheila, she wouldn't stop at all. She would just continue to keep going until Skylar's neck began to make a weird noise. And after Sheila was done, both girls would walk to Sheila's car, and once they were at the car, they would open the trunk up, and inside the trunk was a shovel, bleach, and some trash bags. It was a kill kit, because both girls had planned this night out. So both girls would clean themselves off of the blood, and then they would begin to clean their weapons. And once they were done, they would take the shovel and walk into the woods, where they would try to dig up a grave for Skylar. But due to the ground being too hard, they couldn't. So they went to plan B, where they would grab Skylar's body and would take it 7 feet away from the nearest road, and then chucked her body on top of a log, and then a big boulder on top of that, and other things that they could find nearby. And at this point, they still don't know if Skylar's still alive or not, but they did it anyway. They just kept on piling stuff on top of her body. Once this was done, the girls would grab all their stuff and put it back into the trunk, and then would drive off. This act that they did was a planned attack, and they would plan this attack for a while. A couple of months to be more specific. And well, you might ask her, why would they do this? And the reason was they just didn't like her, and they would try their best to not include her in things so she would get the hint, but of course Skylar wouldn't. So they resorted to the plan B, killing her. So they would plan to go smoking, but they wouldn't go to a usual spot which was more local. They would go to somewhere which was far away, but also another place where people would go to so it wouldn't rise suspicions. And again, Skylar was a bit skeptical at first, but Rachel would ensure her that this place was so good for smoking and we need to go there. But of course the plan was so they can just get away from the town. And when they all sat down, Sheila had intentionally not bring her lighter with her so she could ask Skylar to go to the car and get her one, which obviously gives the girls an opportunity to strike her from the back. And the girls promised each other that, and as soon as we hear 3, we must attack. Ultimately, Rachel would be sentenced to 30 years in prison, but she would be eligible for parole in 2023. And Sheila would be sentenced to life in prison, but she would also be eligible for parole in 2028. The worst part was in the trial, Rachel would be very remorseful and would apologize profusely to Skylar's parents. But not Sheila though, she would smirk all the way through the trial and just making this whole situation a joke. And another horrible part was on Twitter actually. Just a day after the announcement was made about Skylar's body being found, Sheila would tweet, "We really did go on 3," obviously making the whole thing a joke once again. So that'll be it for today's video. If true crime videos intrigue your interest, then I highly suggest you subscribe to my YouTube channel, as that's all I do. And I upload once a week. And also comment down below your thoughts on this story, as I would love to get your guys' reactions. But with all that being said, thank you for watching, and yeah, goodbye.